Washington, D.C.
Tonight, big tech's divide. Apple and Amazon deliver another split verdict on big tech earnings. Amazon shares climb as growth at its AWS cloud business delivers a fifth straight quarter of growth, while Apple slips amid slower than expected China sales. Bloomberg Tech's Ed Ludlow is standing by with more. Plus, Senate standoff. President Trump threatens to temporarily pull his attorney general nominee rather than yield to two Republican senators blocking the confirmation and renominate him once they're out of office. The escalating fight exposing new fractures between Trump and his party on Capitol Hill. And escalating conundrum, the U.S. unleashes another major round of strikes on Iran after President Trump vowed to hit Tehran hard. We'll ask former Defense Secretary Mark Esper whether the latest strikes can force Iran back to the negotiating table or risk pulling the U.S. deeper into a widening regional war. From Bloomberg's Washington, D.C. studios to our TV and radio audiences worldwide, welcome to Balance of Power. I'm Kaylee Lyons alongside Joe Matthew.
We've got Bloomberg reporters standing by across Washington and around the country to cover these stories. Thanks for joining us as we kick things off now with two critical earnings releases after the bell, with fresh quarterly results from both Apple and Amazon. Amazon first out of the gate with stronger than expected revenue from its web services unit, which was enough to offset a lower than expected revenue forecast and sent the stock up sharply. As we can see here in after hours trading up about 8%. Apple, meantime, posting stronger than expected revenue and earnings, but it missed estimates on services and its China business. And that stock is lower after the bell, down almost 5%. For more, we turn to Ed Ludlow, the host of Bloomberg Tech. Just like last night, Ed, we've got quite the contrast with these two reports.
Yes, and with Apple, there is the added tension and story of this being Tim Cook's last earnings and call as CEO before he becomes executive chair September 1st. What happened in Greater China? What accounts for the miss? It was a slight miss. The biggest story is probably how different is the world going to look for Apple in 3 months relative to today. Gross margins came in 2 percentage points better than the street had modeled for because of tariff refunds. If you strip those out, it didn't really mask the impact of higher memory prices, but also tight supply on memory. Will they have an answer for that going forward? How will that impact the bottom line going forward? Otherwise, a relatively clean beat where iPhone comes in strong, and for Apple, iPhone is still everything. In Amazon, it was the AI story that has been consistent in this earnings window. Show us the cloud growth, and in AWS, 37% was beyond street consensus. There's a lot more in that. Just as we've discussed over the last few days, Amazon gave lots of data points of where their AI is getting traction in the real world. The AI business has a $25 billion run rate. Their chip business, where they rent out cloud capacity, but specifically running on their in-house silicon, a $25 billion run rate. Even Alexa, and I'm an Alexa household, is showing that those that use Alexa Plus, the latest AI iteration, are doing other things in the Amazon ecosystem and signing up for Prime. So this is a strong reaction to that print, but do we get Capex guidance that's forward-looking? We didn't from Meta, and that was a big factor for the call.
Yeah, we'll be looking out for the headlines from that call. And obviously, these two names that are going to take up a lot of the oxygen. But we did get a number of other reports after the bell, including from Rivian, which is a company I know you followed from the very beginning. Are they finally turning things around?
The losses are narrowing, and they finally launched their mass market product in the quarter, the R2. The question is, when does that become meaningful? When does it help them with profit? When do they start selling those more than their expensive, lower volume products? I spoke to the CFO.
The joint venture represents about 60% of our software and services revenue. That will decrease over time, especially as we introduce advanced autonomy and into a growing car park and see additional sales of software features to our customers. So today we have a Fleet OS subscription, for example, to every one of our commercial vans that we sell to Amazon. And that creates a recurring high-margin revenue stream that's quite predictable for the business.
I play that clip because the Rivian software and services business is growing faster than the actual car business. They're getting a lot of helping hands from payments that VW is making to them to take their software and other technologies. But there is a world where Rivian is kind of putting itself into the same mold as Tesla, becoming more multifaceted and getting some traction. By the way, they've actively tapped the equity market in the quarter. When I asked Claire McDonough if they do it again, she said, sure, we're always opportunistic.
All right, Bloomberg's Ed Ludlow will let you hop on those calls now. Thank you so much for your coverage. And now for a closer look at how the broader markets performed today, we turn now to Power Moves with Bloomberg's Nora Melinda, who joins live from World Headquarters in New York. Nora.
Well, markets completely changing their tune from what we saw just yesterday. We do see Microsoft completely changing sentiment in the market, pushing major indexes higher. We saw the Nasdaq 100 getting a pop above a 3% gain on the day. Most of the gains in the market on Wall Street were due to tech. I'm taking a look at the Philadelphia Semiconductors Index. That index higher by 8% on the day. That's the best day that we've seen for that group since April of last year. We saw the S&P 500 ending higher by about 1.7%, and the Dow Jones Industrial Average, the laggard, up about 1.2%. But of course, we also have to keep an eye on what's going on in the Middle East. We did see oil pulling back a bit today. We are seeing Brent crude lower by about 1.5%, hanging around $89 a barrel, while WTI is sitting at around $83 a barrel. And the Fed meeting being one of the highlights of the week, we know that that's really been impacting the bond market. The Fed keeping rates unchanged yesterday, and we are seeing yields falling at the front end of the curve. But if you look at some of those longer dated bonds, like the 30-year Treasury yield, we are seeing that, of course, seeing its 18th day in a row with that yield sitting above 5%, still sitting at its highest level since 2007.
Nora, one of the top read stories all day on the terminal was about situational awareness. And this was all the talk in the trading pits today. This 25-year-old former OpenAI employee named Leopold Aschenbrenner had one of the biggest hedge funds, certainly most popular, had more than $20 billion in assets as of late May, falling to about $10 billion, to the point where Citadel stepped in to buy the bulk of its public stock bets. This is quite the story of a margin call. Did it had something to do with all of these AI stocks being lower the last couple of weeks?
Well, it's really interesting to see a hedge fund that's really been delving into that AI bet, really seeing and taking it to the chin due to that AI unwind that we've been seeing in the market. The market really trying to decide whether or not it wants to bet on the artificial intelligence of the future and whether or not these companies are actually able to keep up with the spending that they're doing there. But we are seeing situational awareness really being targeted in this moment in terms of what it means in terms of the money that they are spending. And a lot of those names that have been the laggards there, we are seeing money just pouring out of this company. As you mentioned, Citadel stepping in to help facilitate this exit. This is essentially just one of those stories of AI enthusiasm getting checked. And of course, here by one of those most high profile names that a lot of Wall Street is keeping an eye on.
Remarkable turn of fortune here. Bloomberg's Nora Melinda. Thank you so much, Nora. Back here in Washington, where news spread fast after President Trump suggested temporarily pulling Todd Blanche's nomination to be Attorney General after the Senate Judiciary Committee canceled the confirmation vote that was set for this morning. As two outgoing members we've talked about a lot lately, Senators John Cornyn and Tom Tillis withheld their support over demands for written proof that the president's proposed anti-weaponization fund is officially dead. President Trump threatening on Truth Social earlier, quote, "I have no objection to temporarily withdrawing Todd's name if they do not do the right thing," and putting him back after Cornyn and Tillis are out of office, unquote. Joining us now for more, Bloomberg Justice Department reporter Chris Strohm. It's great to see you, Chris, and thanks for joining us on Balance of Power. What does this mean? Todd Blanche is acting to infinity?
Well, it's really astounding that President Trump would talk about withdrawing Blanche's nomination. Blanche is somebody who has done everything that Trump wants and more. And it appears that Trump is more interested in protecting his ability to have immunity from investigations and audits than he is in fighting for Todd Blanche. But yeah, if he withdraws the nomination, Todd Blanche will continue on as an acting attorney general. And Trump says that he could come back when the new Congress convenes in January to try to get him confirmed. But there's no guarantee. We don't know what the new Congress is going to look like.
Right.
And there's no guarantee the senators will go along with it then.
Yeah, Cornyn and Tillis could very well be replaced by Democrats. So it begs the question, Chris, of how long under our law he could serve in an acting capacity before the president would be forced to nominate someone new.
It's unprecedented. We've never had a situation where we've had an attorney general who's been in an acting capacity for a indefinite period of time. And it raises questions of whether if there could be legal challenges to certain actions that he takes. As of right now, I'm told that negotiations are still ongoing to try to reach a deal by next week. Blanche and Cornyn and Tillis just had a meeting. I'm told that they're working through their differences, but we've heard that for days. There's been no breakthrough. The real test will be over the weekend if they can reach an agreement. They could come back on next week and go through the confirmation process before the Senate adjourns. But at this point, it doesn't look good.
Wow. We don't know what DOJ presented them today, right? That there was new language, some sort of half measure that would suggest anti-weaponization is still alive?
Yeah, well, right now, Blanche is making concessions that he can make. Yeah. The Justice Department has agreed to put in writing that the weaponization fund will be rescinded, but Cornyn and Tillis want much more than that. They want to go into the immunity for the IRS audits. Understood. And they want to limit the scope and the reach of the immunity, and also the ability for other agencies to do investigations. And at this point, Blanche isn't conceding to that.
All right, Bloomberg's Chris Strohm, thank you so much. And while we heard from President Trump about Todd Blanche today, he has not signaled whether tonight could bring another round of strikes against Iran after the U.S. launched a heavy wave of airstrikes overnight Wednesday in retaliation for Iran's attacks on U.S. assets in the Middle East. And joining us now for more is Bloomberg's Jeff Mason, who's live at the North Lawn of the White House. So, Jeff, should we take the fact that we haven't heard more threats from the president to take further action against Iran, that there may not be fresh strikes this evening?
Oh, you know what? It's hard to decide. It's hard to say what to take from the signals coming from this White House, because they just changed so much on this war, and they changed so much coming from President Trump. That said, you're absolutely right to point out that he didn't flag it today, and he had the previous day when he said it was our turn, referring to the U.S. turn after Iran sent multiple ballistic missiles in the Middle East trying to hit U.S. targets. All of those missiles were intercepted, but the response came swiftly. Last night, U.S. Central Command, or CENTCOM, saying that it had targeted and hit multiple targets within Iran, and it's just another example, Kayleigh, of increasing escalation in the last few days, despite what looked like a temporary pause over the weekend that now is, again, up in the air and hard to predict.
You know, Jeff, we were just talking with Chris Strohm about this situation with Todd Blanche. The president was out on Truth Social early to bark at senators for not making this happen, specifically Tom Tillis and John Cornyn. He's suggesting pulling the nomination. So we've got another acting official here, potentially in place for a lot longer than some expected. And that's been a bit of a model for this president, hasn't it?
It absolutely has been a model. He hasn't used it a bunch in the second term, but he used it a lot during his first term. He even had an acting chief of staff for a long time, in part because he just didn't want to fully commit to that person. So the acting model is certainly one that the president uses. I would also take maybe a slightly different take on what he's doing here from Chris. I don't think necessarily that the president is saying he doesn't want to fight for Todd Blanche by making this move. I think he probably is looking at the political reality that he can't get Todd Blanche confirmed right now, and that's the reason he's waiting. But I don't think that means he doesn't want him. Chris was absolutely right to point out that we don't know what the political situation is going to be after the election, but the president may be betting on at least having a Republican Senate and a couple more new friendly voices in that conglomeration that would help him get Blanche over the finish line.
Remarkable. Once again, Jeff, thank you so much. Quite a day at the White House, even though we never really saw the president. Coming up, Iran vowing to punish the U.S. again after a wave of overnight strikes, and we'll have more on the escalation against Iran when former Defense Secretary Mark Esper joins us, only here on Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio.
We're going to be hitting them very hard because it's our turn to hit them. They know it's coming. They're asking us not to do it, but, they tried shooting. So we had 5 rockets shot going 8,500 miles an hour, and all 5 rockets were knocked down to the ground. But they nevertheless took a shot, so it's our turn. And we'll see if we get there with an agreement.
It's our turn. This is Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio. I'm Joe Matthew alongside Kayleigh Lyons. That, of course, was President Trump. And that was just about 24 hours ago, warning Iran of increased strikes shortly before launching a heavy wave of attacks against the country overnight. This evening, the conflict with Iran risks engulfing ever more countries as the war widens after Jordan's state media reported the country shot down 5 missiles launched from Iran today, coming after the U.S. thwarted an attack on U.S. personnel in Jordan earlier this week. Separately, 2 LNG tankers struck in Egypt, all a day after Saudi Arabia committed fighter jets to strike Iranian-backed targets in Iraq. So how did we get here after talks of a potential ceasefire just a few weeks ago? And what comes next? Joining us now is Mark Esper, the former Defense Secretary in the first Trump administration, now partner at Red Cell Ventures. Secretary, welcome back to Bloomberg TV and radio. It seems every couple of days we're adding another country to the list. How big will this get?
Yeah, well, first of all, good to be with you, Joe, and Kayleigh this afternoon. Look, I think you're asking a very important question. Clearly, this conflict is now escalating horizontally and vertically, by the way. Horizontally, in a sense, as you mentioned, Egypt was struck today, and not just the Suez Canal, but the Mediterranean port of Egypt. So it was quite a long shot and did some damage, and it's expanded eastward as far as the Caspian Sea. And we also know today that the Saudis stood up a 14-member maritime security alliance, which includes all the right folks you would expect, Arab states. But what it doesn't include, or what it also included, were countries in Africa, such as Sudan and Nigeria. So again, this conflict is expanding, and at the same time, it's getting more intense. We just came off, 12, 13, 14 days of airstrikes by the president, and the Iranians, acting on their own against Jordan. So long days ahead, and I don't see an end anytime soon either, Joe.
Well, Mr. Secretary, as you talk about the horizontal escalation, let's focus on the vertical escalation. How many rungs are left on the vertical escalation ladder for the U.S. to climb?
Well, there are multiple, but we know there are several we don't want to take, and those that we don't want to take are clearly ground troops, whether it's on Karg Island or whether it's just opposite where the strait is narrowest or even deep into Iran. But we could escalate back to the levels that we saw at the beginning of the conflict in late February, early March, where we're striking deep into Iran, heavy ordnance into Tehran and other places. You would have Israel join back into the fight. And to me, that would be going up a couple more rungs of that ladder when you see that again.
Well, so the president talks about finishing this the easy way or the hard way. Whether you believe there's a credible negotiation underway or not, Secretary, I'm curious what you think the hard way looks like. Is there, in fact, a military option that would end this?
I don't think there is a military option from the air, Joe. I think if he wants to put ground troops on the ground, clearly you could do that. That would be decisive, but that would take a long time to build up that combat power, and clearly that comes with a lot of risks. And I think that's something we would want to do with allies and partners. So I've argued at this point, given how much resilience and endurance that the Iranians have shown, I would strangle them economically. I think the blockade is the right thing to do, but I think we should also blockade them on all entry points, ground and air as well, around that country, and strangle them. We know that through the Strait, they were receiving from oil sales about $435 million a year, and that was about an overwhelming majority of their revenue coming in, but they're getting revenue from other sources. It's a pretty well diversified economy. And so I think if you can shut that down, then you can prevent them from rebuilding their military. You can prevent them from funding the proxies. You can prevent them from buying weapons abroad, like we've heard they may be doing from China with 300 to 400 shoulder-fired missiles. So to me, you should strangle them. It would take a long time. It would take patience and discipline on our side. And of course, it would mean higher energy costs for everybody around the world. But to me, that is the option I would pursue. And I would throw in, of course, strikes against strategic targets, principally the IRGC, because the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps is clearly running the show right now in Tehran.
You say that strangling them would take more time. Would it also take more assets from the United States, more personnel deployed to the Middle East, or would we be able to do that with what already is in theater?
Well, look, I think we should expand this, Kayleigh. I think it has to be internationalized. It has to include our Asian partners and certainly our European partners. And if you look, there's 6 or 7 countries that surround Iran. Surely we can get the support of Turkey, Armenia, Azerbaijan. The stands will be a little bit more challenging, but I think we have to employ all those assets. We have to globalize this conflict because it's affecting international commerce. It's affecting the principle of freedom of the sea. It's affecting global energy prices. We're taking this on too much of ourselves, or to a lesser extent with Israel. So I think it's time to globalize it and then think about, again, a broader set of sanctions, blockading the entire country, squeezing them economically.
I want to ask you about what's happening in Ukraine, Secretary. As Ukraine strikes deeper into Russia, Russia is proving to be formidable with massive missile attacks on civilian targets in Kyiv. It's not the first time we've seen it, but it only seems to get worse. And today, my goodness, a spare missile landing in Poland, believed to be Russian, leading NATO jets to be scrambled. Is this an Article 5 conversation? Is this escalating in Ukraine?
I don't think so, and I don't think it should over this, Joe. We've had this happen before. The Russians, either they have a malfunction or something like that. I recall a couple years ago when we thought it was a Russian missile. It was actually a Ukrainian air defense missile. But in this case, it was a Russian cruise missile, according to the Polish leader. It hit somewhere like 60 miles within Polish territory, and it went way off course. So I don't think this is an Article 5 issue. I think it should be discussed. I think there should be warnings sent to Moscow once again. But look, I think what you're seeing is Moscow is trying to break the back and break the will of the Ukrainian people. They're not going to do that. And at the same time, we know the Ukrainians may have turned the corner with regard to the Russians strategically by doing, as you said, striking deep into Russia, hitting their energy supplies, their refineries, their industrial bases, and really bringing this conflict home to the Russian people in a way that we haven't seen in, 4+ years. So hopefully at some point this will bring Vladimir Putin to the negotiating table.
Well, Ukraine also, and the president of Ukraine, Volodymyr Zelensky, expressed that in D.C. when he was here for Lindsey Graham's funeral this week, desperately needs interceptors. They want more Patriots if they can have them. So long as we're mired in the Middle East, though, Mr. Secretary, are they going to be able to get them?
I don't think so, Kayleigh, unless they reprioritize current stock loads. You know, there's some countries that have a pretty healthy supply. I'm told that Greece, for example, has a good supply and is not, like a Baltic state, a frontline state that has to be concerned about Russian missiles. So the question is, can you reallocate those stockpiles between NATO allies? Maybe there's some Asian allies as well that could give it up. But look, production lines for a Patriot missile, and I worked for a major defense company for several years, years ago. It takes up to 2 years to build at a cost of $4 million each. So we can expend these missiles in a matter of minutes, but it takes, months, if not years, to rebuild. So that supply chain is going to take a long time, despite whatever efforts DOD has underway to kind of build it up and to expand capacity.
All right, Mr. Secretary, thank you for joining us. The former Defense Secretary in the first Trump administration, Mark Esper. We appreciate it. Now, we do have some breaking news just crossing the terminal. The Amazon earnings call, of course, is underway, and the CEO, Andy Jassy, has just given us some forward guidance on Capex. Amazon is expecting to spend $220 billion on Capex in the year 2026. No surprise, Jassy says that is mostly on AI. This is an upward revision from the company's previous Capex guidance. They had guided before around $200 billion. All that said, they don't seem to be getting punished for it, as we have seen sometimes in the past. Amazon shares right now up 8.5% roughly after hours, Joe.
Not bad. It's pulling back a touch from the highs that we've seen after the bell, but clearly the amazing number for AWS is what has traders' attention, and maybe they're looking ahead to 2027 for another number that might give us a little bit more guidance. But this is a good sign for a market that's been pretty jittery when it comes to Capex.
Indeed, and of course there's been jitters in the equity market, there's been jitters in the bond market as well, and that sent mortgage rates to the highest in a year this week on inflation concerns. We'll get into that with Heather Boushey, formerly of the Council of Economic Advisors, next on Bloomberg TV and radio. This is Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio. Alongside Joe Matthew, I'm Kayleigh Lines. U.S. mortgage rates hit their highest level in a year today, with the average for a 30-year fixed loan climbing to 6.66%, following Fed Chair Kevin Warsh's news conference yesterday, which sent long-end yields to the highest since 2007. National Economic Council Director Kevin Hassett joined Bloomberg earlier today to weigh in on Warsh's performance on rates and the weaker data we got this morning. Listen.
I think he's a realist, but he's really serious about getting inflation back to its target. That's his job. He's a very, very pragmatic person who understands the responsibility of the Fed is a dual mandate, and the part of the mandate that's been out of control recently is inflation. And most of that was not the Fed's fault.
They went around the horn earlier today with Mr. Hassett. You can catch the full conversation with the National Economic Council Director on the terminal or online. Joining us now with her take on the economic picture is Heather Boushey, former member of the Council of Economic Advisors in the Biden administration. And Heather, I'm curious your thoughts as you watched this Fed meeting yesterday, knowing what policymakers were up against, whether that was the opportunity to hike, and the visceral reaction from Wall Street. Is Kevin Warsh ready for prime time?
Well, that's a great question. That's a question to ask him and the president. But I mean, here's the thing. You know, the fact that markets responded the way they did indicates that they didn't think that his approach to what he was saying about where the monetary authorities were going had as much credibility as I think Kevin, the chair, hoped it would. I mean, everyone can see that prices are going up. We just got new data today, and given that the war is back on with Iran and tariffs are up, this is creating a challenge for the Federal Reserve, and they're going to have to act on it. And him hiding the ball and not being clear about that does not seem to have gone over very well.
Well, so when we consider then the question of Kevin Warsh's credibility, that does seem to be what the market was contending with yesterday and into today, as well as we heard from Morgan Stanley's chief economist, Michael Gapin, earlier today on Bloomberg Surveillance. This is what he told our colleagues, Heather.
I think Fed credibility took a hit yesterday. It doesn't mean it's not recoverable. I just think in the outcome of the meeting was we're not sure what you're doing. So yes, I thought you might be credible in this direction. I got a different message. I do think credibility suffered a bit. It's not permanent. But to your question on intent, again, if you don't fill a gap with your view, other views will go in it. Whether they're right or wrong, we'll ultimately see.
On the question he got to, Heather, about whether or not this is recoverable, is the only way to recover from it to hike rates?
Well, that is a good question. Certainly what we are seeing is an economy where there's a lot of concerns about inflation. We got data today that shows that it has not been accelerating over the past quarter using the Fed's preferred rate, but it remains too high. And again, the administration keeps taking actions that are raising costs for families, that are making things like gas and electricity and other things more expensive for people all across the country, alongside healthcare and things like this, and making it hard for wages to keep up with the pace of price increases. So that all seems like a big problem. On the other hand, we have a labor market that is not, it's not in the tank, but is certainly not as robust as we would like. And again, wages are failing to keep up with inflation. So I think the Fed is in a difficult situation, but they clearly are not communicating their intentions, and that is upending markets.
Well, so what do you think about this bond fire underway here, Heather Boushey? 5.2% on the 30-year, the highest we've seen in almost 20 years. A reaction simply to Warsh yesterday or more?
Well, I think, under some of your questions is really what's going on with the fundamentals of the economy. And I think, there's a lot of conversations that we're having here in Washington that I'm hearing every day is what's happening with AI, what's happening with this investment. Big questions. What is that going to do to the job market? But really, what is that doing to investment? How much of capital is being sucked into these investments in AI? And will that lead to the kind of productivity gains that we would like to see without the kinds of job losses that we don't want to see? So we're at this moment where there's a lot of questions on the technology side. There's also a lot of questions in terms of where this government is headed, what they will do, and what's going to happen with global energy prices. I think the news, the segment that you had right before this one on the war, what is happening there and what that does to global energy prices and how long this lasts remains an unknown shock that the economy is going to have to weather through.
Well, and of course, the Fed, with its tools, aren't necessarily best positioned to respond to a supply side shock like that. If they do indeed tighten policy because of inflation that's being driven in large part by higher energy prices, is that just going to tumble us potentially into stagflation at the least and a recession at the worst?
Well, Kayla, you're laying out some real worst case scenarios here, and I think that is the problem. The Fed is, the central banks have really big and important tools. They can, they have control over financial stability, they have control over interest rates, the cost of borrowing, but what they don't control is all of the other things that have to do with our supply chains. And these are lessons that we've learned over the past few years, both how fragile and how brittle supply chains can be, how difficult it can be to get things up and running again, and importantly, how energy shocks work their way through the economy. So yes, the Fed does have some tools to deal with this, but as I keep coming back to, this is also about what the administration is doing. The administration itself is raising prices for consumers. It's creating real tough choices. Families have spent on average around $500 over the past year on higher energy prices because of the war in Iran. You add to that all the people who've seen, now their mortgage rates are going up. We already know housing is a problem, but of course, health insurance costs going up because of the cutbacks and supports to families. All of this means that people don't have money to spend on other sorts of goods and services. So you have to have the fiscal authorities working with the monetary authorities. And I think that's where we've seen real challenges and lack of clarity. So it isn't just at the Fed, it is with this administration more generally.
Important headline from overseas late today, Heather, with the yen up over 3% here on signs of intervention. The Nikkei says Japan indeed intervened in the market again. In the foreign exchange market, citing market participants, U.S. authorities are requesting quotes now on the dollar-yen rate. What does this tell you, and how would you have handled this if you were still in the White House?
Well, fortunately, that wasn't my portfolio, so I would not have been dealing with the international exchange rate issues. But I think this speaks to this larger question, which is when you have a country as big as the United States, as economically important as we are, acting in a way that is so often inconsistent. We were talking a few minutes ago before the segment started. You never know one day to the next what our foreign economic policy will look like, what tariffs will look like. That makes it harder for everyone else to ensure stability across markets.
Well, yeah, and I'm sure that the U.S. Treasury is going to have something to say about this if indeed this was intervention. We know Scott Bessent has had some pretty strong feelings about that. Heather, of course, as you talk about, you never know what's coming one day to the next. It definitely is true for tariff policy, which is what we were discussing prior to the segment. We obviously have higher tariff rates going back in to replace rates that were expiring. What is really the net effect of these on economic behavior at this point, as we are seeing, obviously, inflation being driven by the Middle East? Has it necessarily been because of the tariffs as well?
Well, I think what we've seen is that tariffs have added to the problem. They're adding to price increases for consumers, but also for businesses. And one of the things we know is that it's difficult for firms to readjust their supply chains on a dime. It requires time and investment, domestic investment. One of the things that popped out to me from today's new report on GDP is that factory construction is falling and is down below its peak of a couple, maybe 6 quarters ago. I can't remember exactly. And I mean, that's an important indicator of how U.S. investors and U.S. firms are dealing with the supply side shocks that they're seeing in terms of the tariffs. It's going to take them time to build up that capacity domestically. But of course, we know the administration has been cutting back on supports for that kind of investment in a variety of ways. The President Trump's administration, of course, has admitted that they have cut back grants for investments in energy in states that did not vote for him, which is an incredible abdication of your responsibility as a federal policymaker in so many ways. So for the tariffs cause this chaos without the supports and the help that communities need, that businesses need to make the investments so that people can get the things that they need from the market. So again, it's a chaotic way to implement this. Even if you think there's some good at the end of the day, which it's unclear because so often, just like this round of tariffs, they appear more capricious than they do grounded in sound economic thinking.
All right, Heather Boushey, former member of the Council of Economic Advisors in the Biden administration. Thank you so much. And on the subject of tariffs, the Amazon earnings call is underway, and the CFO just said Amazon received $600 million in tariff refunds in the second quarter and are issuing automated tariff refunds to some of its customers. But that's not the big headline out of the earnings call. It's instead the Capex number. $220 billion in Capex is what Amazon is expecting this year, most of that on AI. Joining us now for more on that is Ed Ludlow, once again, the host of Bloomberg Tech. So, Ed, what else are we learning, not just from Amazon's call, but Apple's as well?
Yeah, I mean, Amazon, that is the big headline. They had told us Capex was $200 billion. They've added $20 billion to that, and with more detail that is largely being spent on AI. Remember, Amazon's business is multifaceted. It is an e-commerce business with which we're very familiar, and the tariffs largely relate probably to that e-commerce business. Then there's the cloud business. It's not the majority of revenue, but it's the majority of operating income. And it's there where this Capex is really going. So it's a big headline. And what's changed since we spoke at the top of the show is that Amazon's gain in after hours has really accelerated, and Apple's decline has really accelerated and deepened to a drop of almost 8%, now beyond 7%. Apple, the headline's very different. We posed the question, how difficult is the world going to look for Apple in 3 months relative to now? Well, we have some information on that. Fiscal fourth quarter revenue is going to be growth of 9 to 11%. The street wanted to hear Apple say that growth would be beyond 12%. And what Tim Cook's talking about is that actually memory prices that he's going to be paying, or not him actually, he's stepping down as CEO, right, effective September 1st, but Apple's going to be paying will be higher, and they're trying to manage those supply constraints. But guys, no sentimentality for Tim Cook's final call. He had an opportunity to say his farewell, but the stock's down a lot.
Amazing. So what, we've had 4 of the big 7 so far, the Mag 7, Ed, and we're 2 and 2?
5. We've had Tesla. We still have NVIDIA to come.
That's right.
Maybe
that's
6
right, because we had Alphabet.
You know, what is space
math.
and time?
4 in the last 2 days.
That's right.
Yeah.
Than the last 2. But the point is, we've got a pretty mixed picture as we try to figure out where we're going in the next quarter. Maybe we shouldn't be lumping them all into the same group anymore here, huh?
Yeah, look, the 2 metrics that matter still are spending and then the return on that spending. Amazon gave us an even bigger Capex number for this year. But the stock in after hours did not change trajectory because Amazon had also given us lots of different data points that they're seeing growth in different lines of business related to AI. So AWS is the cloud unit. Overall growth, 37%, was beyond the 31% the street expected. But they also gave us other metrics. For example, their AI business, which is revenues they derive directly from selling AI services. It could be a place where you train or host models like Bedrock, has a revenue run rate of $25 billion. Their chip business, where they have in-house chips, they've developed the silicon themselves, renting computer capacity based on those away from NVIDIA GPUs, much higher margin for them, $25 billion run rate business. This is just all extra. And, you know, we've seen that with the winners. Microsoft gave extra data points, others didn't, and they were punished for it in the after hours.
All right. Bloomberg's Ed Ludlow. Thank you very much. And still ahead, we'll talk about the massive amount of money Elon Musk could be spending in this year's midterms. A new report that puts a price tag on his renewed political involvement on behalf of Republicans. That and more when our political panel joins next on Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio.
In terms of political spending, I'm going to do a lot less in the future.
And why is that?
I think I've done enough.
Is it because of blowback?
Well, if I see a reason to do political spending in the future, I will do it. I do not currently see a reason.
This is Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio. Alongside Joe Matthew, I'm Kaylee Lyons. And that was Elon Musk speaking with Bloomberg in May of 2025. Fast forward to today, in July of 2026, and Musk is reportedly seeing reason to get back in the political game. The Tesla and SpaceX founder and biggest donor in the 2024 presidential election is expected to spend $100 to $120 million over the course of the next several months to help Republicans in this year's midterms, according to the New York Times. The Times reporting, citing people familiar, that Musk has authorized his super PAC, America PAC, to spend that amount on a new field program to promote turnout in at least 8 states, planning to initially target Senate races in Alaska, Iowa, Maine, Michigan, and Ohio. Remember, it was just last year that Musk's Tesla board sought to curb his political involvement as part of a negotiation over a $1 trillion pay package. Musk threatened to quit over the request and was rewarded that pay anyway.
Joining us now, our political panel, Democratic strategist Kristen Hahn is with us, and Mick Mulvaney, former acting chief of staff in Donald Trump's first-term co-founding member of the House Freedom Caucus. Kristen, of course, a partner at Rock Solutions. It's great to see you both. Welcome back.
Hello, Joseph.
$100 million. Elon Musk clearly doesn't think much of the Republican Party. Isn't that like pocket change for him?
You know, for a midterm, that's a pretty decent size number.
I'm kidding, of course.
He's not, by the way, he won't be the only person, I don't think, in the country over $100 million.
No, that's a joke. That's a lot of money. So what happened, though, since he was talking there with the flight jacket on to suddenly now there's a reason?
Man, that was May of 2025. That was ages ago. What are we talking about? I mean, what did he say? He said, I'll do it if I, look, the deal's the deal until it's no longer the deal.
Yeah.
I mean, he's not making a long-term commitment. By the way, what are the chances of him changing his mind before he writes the check for $100 million? 50-50, flip a coin.
Well, does it make you nervous as a Democrat to think that Elon Musk may very well spend $100 million to get people to knock on doors in states you want to win?
No, I mean, there's a lot of money on all sides, right? Everybody has their.
If you could buy elections, everybody would do
individuals have $1 billion between their party committees, between MAGA Inc., the President's PAC that he hasn't even tapped into
And our candidates have also raised a lot of money, and then the DNC is borrowing against the building. I mean, the D-Trip is, the HMP, the Senate Majority PAC, House Majority PAC, the Super PAC, Center Forward, other organizations. There's a lot of money coming in on both sides. I think that on campaigns, you saturate the airwaves to a certain point. I think the fact that he's focusing on the ground game is really important. Right?
I just hope he's learned something because, he did this in that very high-profile Wisconsin Supreme Court race. Look, campaigns are a business. They are. It's not something that you just do sort of intuitively. I think he learned this at Doge. Government is the same way. It's its own thing, and you could learn how to do it. And there are people who are really good at it, and there are people who are not really good at it. I hope they do better on this effort than they did in Wisconsin.
In the way they spend the money or the way he presents himself?
No, spend the money. Okay. How do you look, money is really not going to be the issue. She's right. Kristen's right. There's going to be plenty of money on both sides. And the dirty little secret in the business is you don't really need to have more money than the other side to win. You just have enough. You have to have enough money to do the job, and then you have to do it correctly.
And not put yourself right in the middle of it, right? Because he made himself the face of it.
Never forget
right?
She's
like, what are you doing? Just like you said, leave it to the people who know exactly what they're doing on the ground.
Good news for Democrats? Think of the commercials you're going to make of the chainsaw of, what was it again? Bureaucracy, the cheese head, the jumping up and down, the black eye that Scott Bessent gave him, the burning Teslas, the fallout with Trump. Is that the face of can't you have fun with this as a campaigner?
I wouldn't. I mean, if he makes himself the face of it, if he does something super embarrassing in the next, couple months, then maybe there's like a, we'll do something online that'll be funny and that you can get some views. Okay. But no, this is all about what's affordable. I mean, let's go back to the issues. People still don't trust Democrats that we are, we're offering a good alternative. So. We're not going to focus on Elon Musk. He's not. We're not shifting our entire messaging program away from affordability to Elon.
Why focus on Elon Musk when you could focus on Donald Trump? I mean, look. You beat up on people like that. And we've done this before as Republicans as well. When you really don't want to talk about the issues, they want to talk about the issues. The Democrats, they want to talk about affordability. They want to talk about inflation. That's leading their way so far in this cycle. So, by the way, let's look at it this way: if you do see them running ads that feature Elon Musk, it means the other stuff isn't working.
Yeah. Wow.
Well, on the subject of what Democrats want to talk about, they are not a monolith, and sometimes they want to talk about things in different ways, perhaps further from the left and more from the center. We're certainly seeing that on display, Kristen, in Michigan. Yes. We got some new polling out for the Democratic Senate primary from Emerson College. Abdul El-Sayed up 15 points on Haley Stevens, 54 to 39%, and he just runs away with it on those at the younger end of the spectrum. Haley Stevens is only doing better than him with those over 60. Does that make you nervous ahead of Tuesday?
I will eat my words if I am completely wrong about this, but I have done this before on the show. I think that is wrong. I really do. And I've known Haley for a really long time, and she has surged, over the past month and a half, 6 weeks, right? And then, so I think what you see, there's a lot of money coming into there. He has this very socialist, drives me crazy that people call it the Democratic Socialist Party. I'm like,
and he is not socialist, by the way. He is a progressive. He is not a socialist.
He has said that he's not endorsed by them, but they are sending throngs of people in.
I like calling it the Democrat Socialist. I really do.
Of course you do. But no, they're sending everybody in, and they're working on his behalf. Haley does, all people. But there's one thing for sure. Every eye is going to be on Michigan, come Tuesday, and what's going to happen there.
Because this is a real bellwether as opposed to some of the other. This is as purple as you're going to get, isn't it?
It's a bellwether to a certain extent, right? It's more so than those races that happen in New York, where I was
we're going to collect a lot of dots on
seats. We really care about this Senate seat, right? And he can't win in a general election. I just don't believe that. So it is some sort of bellwether. Now, when you talk about the midterms, it's not like a presidential bellwether. Each candidate is different, in different states and different districts. So if he wins, does it mean we're going to lose?
The DSA narrative, though, they're going to connect the dots from New York to Michigan to Colorado to California. You're doing
it for me. I don't have to say it.
Fulfills
That's right.
the narrative.
But you're right. I think Michigan is, to me, one of the more interesting races for a couple of different reasons. One of which is, and this doesn't get a lot of attention, there's no incumbent. Okay, Maine is a purple state.
Sure.
Georgia is a purple state. North Carolina's a purple state. Well, North Carolina's a little bit different because Cooper is sort of an incumbent because he was governor. But this is a wide open race. And you don't have that power of incumbency like you have, say, in Maine. So I'm fascinated to hear you say that you don't think that Lopsided has any chance in a general election, because clearly there's a lot of Democrats who think that he does, or at least hoping that he does. I thought I saw some polling that said he was actually not that far behind Rogers. In a theoretical matchup. So maybe I'm wrong about that. But no, for all these reasons, Michigan will get a lot of attention.
We could talk more about this, but before we let you go, Mick, I also want to ask you about what's happening with Todd Blanche and his nomination being held up with the standoff between Cornyn and Tillis and the DOJ and perhaps the White House. Does this resolve itself, or is Trump really going to have to table this nomination?
Let me see. Cornyn and Tillis. What do those guys have in common?
They have nothing to lose.
Ask Bill Cassidy.
Exactly right. I mean, these are folks that Donald Trump ran out of the Senate. And I still think it's one of the great miscalculations, one of the few really serious mistakes that this White House has made politically, in that you don't burn your bridges this early. I mean, you have to live with these guys now for the next 6 months, and they have the ability, because the margins are so tight, to make the White House's life absolutely miserable. I think, look, I'd be curious to see what happens if they do get the written confirmation from Blanche that they want regarding this slush fund for the January 6th. I think it's the January 6th folks, right? That's the issue. I'm not even sure that's going to solve the issue for Tillis and Cornyn.
Any quick advice on the acting title for Todd Blanche?
He can keep it for a year, and if he calls me, I can tell him how to keep it longer than a year.
Wow. That's news you can use. I'm glad that we did that.
We have 20 seconds, Kristen. Is Todd Blanche confirmed before the recess?
I don't know. I'm like
before the recess, no chance. Oh no, they took the hearing down. They took the hearing down today. There's no hearing next week for Blanche.
Done.
All right, we'll leave it on that
September.
note. Mick Mulvaney and Kristen Hahn, this was fun. Thank you so much for joining us. Check out the Washington Edition newsletter for more coverage, and we'll see you back here tomorrow on Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and Radio.